I'm Henry, 28 male. I live in a modest apartment in the city, working as an architectural drafter, a job that requires precision and a deep respect for structure. For my entire life, I believed my future was built on a foundation as solid as concrete. The promise that my childhood home, the one my father built and my mother made a home, would one day be mine. But promises, I've learned, can be demolished as easily as old walls, especially when a new owner has different plans. This is the story of how a lie my father told me for decades forced me to dig into the past, to reclaim the future he tried to steal. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The house on 142 Maple Drive wasn't just a building, it was my entire childhood cataloged in wood and brick. Every scuff mark on the hardwood floors in the hallway was a memory, a ghost of me learning to ride a tricycle. The faint pencil marks on the kitchen door frame just above the handle were a testament to my growth, inch by painstaking inch. My father, Mark, a construction manager, had poured the foundation himself. He deframed the walls, laid the shingles, and often told me with a hand on my shoulder, "Henry, this house has good bones, your bones. One day it'll be yours to fill with your own family." This wasn't a casual remark. It was a promise, repeated at birthdays, graduations, and quiet moments working together in the garage. It was the cornerstone of my understanding of family, legacy, and my place in the world. When my parents, Mark and Alina, divorced, I was 12. It was amicable as far as divorces go. No shouting matches, no custody battles. My mom, Alina, moved into a small townhouse across town, and I split my time between them. The house on Maple Drive remained the anchor. It was still home. My dad continued to reinforce his promise, almost as if to reassure me that despite the family breaking apart, this one thing, my inheritance, would remain whole. "No matter what happens, son, this house is your future," he'd say, looking out at the big oak tree in the backyard that we had planted together. I believed him with the unwavering faith only a child can have. That faith carried me through my teenage years and into adulthood. Even after I moved out for college and then into my own apartment to start my career, the house was a fixed point in my universe, a safety net I never thought I'd need but was grateful to have. My father started dating Isabel about 5 years ago. She was an interior designer, vibrant and full of ideas. At first, I was happy for him. After years of quiet evenings and solitary dinners, he seemed lighter, more engaged. Isabel was charming, always complimenting my work and asking about my life with a practiced sincerity. She slowly started making changes to the house. It began subtly: new throw pillows on the couch, a different painting in the entryway. Then came bigger projects. The kitchen, which my mom had lovingly tiled with quirky, colorful ceramics, was gutted and replaced with sterile white marble and stainless steel. "A little update," Isabel called it, her voice tinkling like wind chimes, "to increase the property value." My dad just beamed, proud of her vision. Each change felt like a page being ripped out of my history book. The pencil marks on the door frame were painted over. The worn-out armchair where my dad used to read me bedtime stories was replaced with a sleek, uncomfortable leather chaise lounge. I tried to voice my concerns, framing them as nostalgia. "It's just a lot of changes, Dad," he would just laugh it off. "Henry, you have to let go of the past. Isabel is making this place beautiful, modern." He didn't understand. She wasn't making it a home, she was turning it into a showroom, erasing every trace of my mother and by extension of me. The lie wasn't a sudden, explosive event. It was a slow erosion, a foundation crumbling under the steady pressure of Isabel's influence. The promise that was once spoken with conviction became more and more vague. When I'd bring it up, my dad would get defensive. Of course, it's all for you in the long run," he'd say, waving a dismissive hand. "But we have to be practical, we're living here now." The "we" was a hammer driving a wedge between us. It wasn't him and me anymore, it was him and Isabel. I started to feel like a guest in the house where I grew up, a visitor in my own past. Isabel would host dinner parties with her friends, architects and designers who would walk through the rooms and praise her impeccable taste. I'd stand in the corner, a relic from a previous design era, invisible. The promise was still there, hanging in the air like a ghost, but its edges were becoming transparent. I clung to it because it was all I had left of the origin. Structure of our family. It was the last load-bearing wall, and I could hear it starting to groan under the weight of my father's new life. I just never imagined he would be the one to take a sledgehammer to it himself. The revelation came on a Tuesday, delivered in a crisp manila envelope addressed to my father that I'd picked up from the mailbox while stopping by to borrow a power drill. I was heading to the garage when my dad called me into the kitchen where he and Isabel were sitting at the new marble island sipping wine. He seemed unusually cheerful. "Henry, good you're here," he said, his smile a little too wide. "Isabel and I have some wonderful news." I braced myself. A vacation, another renovation. Isabel held up her glass, the diamond on her finger catching the cold, recessed lighting she'd had installed. Mark and I are taking the next step in cementing our future together, she announced, her eyes flicking to me for a reaction. My dad took a deep breath and then dropped the bomb casually as if he were commenting on the weather. I've added Isabel to the deed of the house. We're officially co-owners. The words didn't register at first. They floated in the air, disconnected from reality. Co-owners, the deed. I stared at him, my mind scrambling to make sense of what he'd just said. The house on Maple Drive, my house, my promised inheritance, now belonged in part to her. The woman who had systematically erased my childhood from its walls was now legally etched into its foundation. I felt the blood drain from my face. The power drill I was holding suddenly felt impossibly heavy. You did what? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My father's smile faltered. He clearly hadn't anticipated this reaction. It's just a formality, Henry, a legal thing. It shows my commitment to Isabel. It doesn't change anything about the long run. But it changed everything. The promise wasn't just broken, it had been a deliberate, calculated lie, repeated for years while he knew, or at least planned, that this was the eventual outcome. He had used that promise to keep me close, to placate me, to ensure I never felt abandoned after the divorce, all while intending to give half of it away. Isabel placed a hand on his arm, her expression a perfect mask of sympathy. Henry, we know this is a bit of a surprise, she said, her voice smooth as silk. But you have to understand, this is our home now. Mark and I are building a life here. It's only fair that we share in the asset. Asset, she called it an asset, not a home, not a legacy. It was a number on a balance sheet to her, and I was just a complication, a loose end from a previous transaction. Fair. I finally said, finding my voice. It came out sharper, louder than I intended. You think that's fair, Dad? You promised me this house. For my entire life, you promised me. My father stood up, his face hardening. The cheerful facade was gone, replaced by the defensive anger I'd come to dread. And it will be eventually. For God's sake, Henry, stop being so dramatic. Nothing has changed. When we're both gone, the house will go to you. This just protects Isabel if something were to happen to me. He was framing it as a noble act, a way to care for his wife. But I saw it for what it was, a betrayal. He was protecting her future by sacrificing mine. He was prioritizing his new life over the promises he made in his old one. I looked from my father's angry face to Isabel's placid, controlled one. She had won. She wasn't just the interior designer, she was the architect of my father's new life, and she had designed me out of the blueprints. I felt a profound sense of foolishness for believing him, for trusting that his word meant something. The cornerstone of my life, that solid promise, was a lie. I had built my sense of security on a foundation of sand, and the tide had just come in. I can't believe you, I said, shaking my head. I placed the power drill on the counter with a loud clank that made them both flinch. I didn't have anything else to say. The argument was over before it began because the decision had already been made, signed, and filed away in a county records office. As I walked out of the kitchen, leaving them in their sterile marble paradise, I felt a cold, hard anger begin to form in my chest. It wasn't the hot, fleeting anger of a simple argument. It was a deep, structural rage. He had forgotten the past, and he had stolen my future. He didn't know it yet, but he had just handed me the motivation to start digging. The days following the confrontation were a blur of anger and disillusionment. I avoided my father's calls, letting them go to voicemail where he'd leave messages alternating between frustration and a forced paternal concern. Henry, you're overreacting, one said. We need to talk about this like adults, said another. But there was nothing to talk about. He had made his decision. He had chosen Isabel and her vision of the future over me and the past we shared. I spent my evenings staring at the blueprints on my drafting table, the precise lines and calculated angles, a stark contrast to the chaotic mess my life had become. My job was about creating stable, reliable structures, yet the very foundation of my own life had been shattered. It was during one of these long, quiet nights that a thought began to surface, a faint memory from a long time ago. It was a memory of my mother, Eleanor, during the divorce. I remembered her sitting at the kitchen table, the real one with the colorful tiles, surrounded by stacks of papers. She had been explaining things to me in the simple terms a 12-year-old could understand. She had talked about assets and possessions and how things would be divided. And I remembered her saying something specific about the house. Something about me. The memory was hazy, wrapped in the fog of adolescent anxiety. But the more I focused, the more it sharpened. She had said something like, your father is keeping the house, but we've made an agreement about you and your future in it. An agreement. A formal agreement written down and signed. It wasn't just my dad's word, it was something legal. A spark of hope, or maybe just desperation, flickered to life inside me. I needed to talk to my mom. I hadn't spoken to her in a few weeks, not wanting to burden her with my father's latest betrayal. But now she was the only one who might have the key. I called her the next morning. My mom, Eleanor, has always been the calm center of my world. She's a paralegal, a profession that perfectly suits her methodical, detail-oriented nature. She listened patiently as I recounted the conversation with my dad and Isabel, her silence on the other end of the line a comforting presence. When I finished, she let out a long, weary sigh. "Oh, Henry," she said, her voice laced with a familiar disappointment in my father. "I'm so sorry. I always worried he would let his new life cloud his judgment." "Mom," I said, my voice tight with urgency. "During the divorce, did you and Dad make any kind of legal agreement about the house? Something specifically about me?" There was a pause. I could hear the faint sound of her turning pages, or perhaps just turning the thought over in her mind. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, we did. It was very important to me. Mark got to keep the house because his business was tied to the local area and I didn't want to uproot you from your school. But in exchange, we put a clause in the divorce decree." A clause. The word sent a jolt through me. "What kind of clause?" I pressed. "It stipulated," she said, her paralegal precision kicking in, "that while he would retain ownership, the house was to be held in trust for you in a sense. The title was to be transferred solely to you free and clear upon your 25th birthday." I froze, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My 25th birthday. I was 28 now, that was 3 years ago. "He never did it," I breathed. "He never transferred the title." "No, I suppose he didn't," she replied, a new edge to her voice. "Honestly, Henry, after a while I assumed you two had made some other arrangement. He kept telling you it would be yours, and I figured he was just waiting for the right time. I never imagined he would add someone else to the deed. That complicates things. That directly violates the terms of the decree." My mind was racing. A legal document, a court-ordered decree. This wasn't just a broken promise anymore. This was a potential breach of a legal agreement. "Mom, do you still have it, the decree?" "Of course," she said without hesitation. "I have copies of everything. They're in a box in the attic. The originals are filed with the county court, but my copy should have everything we need." That evening, I drove to my mother's townhouse. She met me at the door with a sad smile and led me upstairs to the small, cramped attic. In the corner under a dusty sheet was a stack of sealed banker's boxes labeled with dates. She pointed to one marked Divorce 2009. "It's in there," she said. I lifted the box and carried it downstairs, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. We sat at her dining table and I cut the tape, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Inside were folders filled with the legal anatomy of my family's separation. Financial statements, custody agreements, and finally, a thick document stapled together titled Final Decree of Dissolution of Marriage. My mom flipped through the pages with an expert hand, her finger tracing the dense paragraphs of legal text. She stopped about halfway through at a section titled Disposition of Property. And there it was. A faded memory from a dusty box, now staring up at me in black and white. The clause was there exactly as my mother had described it, typed in the dispassionate font of a legal document. It felt strangely powerful, like a secret message from the past written by my parents a lifetime ago to protect a future they could not yet see. Section 7B, Real Property, laid it out in unambiguous terms. The marital home located at 142 Maple Drive shall be retained by the petitioner Mark Johnson, under the express condition that full legal title and ownership be transferred to the child of the marriage, Henry Johnson, upon the child's 25th birthday. No liens, encumbrances, or additional owners shall be added to the property title prior to this transfer. I read it 3 times, each word sinking in deeper, hardening my resolve. No additional owners. He hadn't just failed to transfer the title to me, he had actively violated the decree by adding Isabel to the deed. This wasn't an oversight. This was a deliberate act. My father, the man who built that house, had taken a legal document designed to protect his son and had completely ignored it. The promise he had made to me wasn't just a lie to a child. It was a promise he had made to a judge, and he had broken it. My mom, Alina, watched me, her expression a mixture of sadness and steely determination. As a paralegal, she understood the gravity of the document in front of us better than anyone. "This is a legally binding court order, Henry," she said, her voice firm. "It's not a suggestion. His failure to execute the transfer on your 25th birthday was a breach. Adding Isabel to the deed, that's contempt of court." Contempt of court. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and serious. We were no longer in the realm of family arguments and hurt feelings. We were in the territory of law and consequences. For a moment, a wave of doubt washed over me. This was my father. Was I really going to take him to court? Was I going to turn this family dispute into a legal battle? I looked at the page again, at the cold, hard ink. I thought of Isabel with her smug smile and her talk of assets. I thought of the painted-over pencil marks on the door frame. My father had made his choice. He had sided with his new life and gambled that the past would remain buried. He had gambled wrong. "What do we do?" I asked my mom, my voice low but steady. She tapped the page with her finger. "The first step is to get a certified copy of the decree from the county courthouse. My copy is good for reference, but for any legal action we need an official one. Then we need to find a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but a family law specialist who understands post-decree enforcement." She already had a name in mind, a seasoned attorney named Mr. Davison who her firm had worked with before. He's tough and he doesn't tolerate people who ignore court orders, she explained. The next day I took the morning off from work. My mom and I went to the county courthouse, a large, imposing building that smelled of old paper and floor wax. Navigating the clerk's office was a bureaucratic maze, but my mom moved with the confidence of someone who knew the system. Within an hour, we had it, a certified copy of the divorce decree stamped with an official seal. Holding it in my hands felt different. It was no longer just a piece of paper from a dusty box. It was a legal instrument, a tool. My investigation was complete. The buried truth was now in my hands. The next step was to turn that truth into a weapon. We met with Mr. Davison that afternoon. He was an older man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened intently as we laid out the story, my mom providing the context and me explaining the recent events. I showed him the certified decree and the public property record I had pulled up online, which clearly showed the recent quitclaim deed adding Isabel's name. Mr. Davison read the clause in Section 7B, then looked at the property record, and a slow, grim smile spread across his face. "Well, this is about as clear-cut as it gets," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Your father is in clear violation of a court order. Not only did he fail to perform the required action of transferring the title, but he performed a prohibited action by adding another owner. This isn't just a mistake, it's a flagrant disregard for the law." He explained our options. We could file a motion for contempt and a motion to enforce the original decree. We would be asking the court to force my father to comply, to remove Isabel's name, and to transfer the property to me immediately. He also mentioned that my father could face penalties for the contempt charge, including fines or even jail time in extreme cases. The thought of my father facing a judge, being held accountable not by his disappointed son but by the legal system, was both terrifying and satisfying. This was the path I had to take. The ink on that forgotten page had given me the power to fight back, and I was going to use it. The decision to proceed with legal action felt like crossing a point of no return. The quiet anger that had been simmering inside me for weeks now had a purpose. A direction. It was being channeled with the help of Mr. Davison and my mother into a precisely crafted legal strategy. Our plan was simple but powerful. Mr. Davison would draft and file two motions with the family court. A motion to enforce litigants' rights, which would demand the immediate transfer of the house title to me as stipulated in the decree, and a motion for contempt of court, which would hold my father accountable for his failure to comply and his illegal addition of Isabel to the deed. This was our legal arrow, forged from the metal of the original decree and sharpened by my father's betrayal. The first step, Mr. Davison advised, was to serve my father with the papers. This would be the official declaration of war. There would be no more phone calls, no more arguments in the kitchen. From this point forward, our communication would be through lawyers. The process of drafting the motions took about a week. My mom was invaluable, working with Mr. Davison's office to provide all the necessary documentation and timelines. I tried to focus on my work, but the impending confrontation consumed my thoughts. I felt a strange mix of anxiety and empowerment. Part of me still recoiled at the idea of suing my own father. He was the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who helped me with my math homework. But he was also the man who looked me in the eye and lied, who dismantled my past and tried to give away my future. The day the papers were ready, Mr. Davison called me into his office. He handed me the stack of documents neatly bound. Seeing my father's name, Mark Johnson, listed as the defendant was a jarring moment. "A process server will deliver these to your father's home tomorrow morning," Mr. Davison said. "You should be prepared for his reaction. He's going to be angry. He might try to call you to intimidate you or guilt you. Do not engage, refer him to me, let the legal process do its work." I spent that night in a state of nervous anticipation. The next morning, I was at my drafting table trying to concentrate on the clean lines of a building elevation when my phone buzzed. It was my father. I stared at his name on the screen, my heart pounding. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again and again. Then a text message appeared. "Henry, call me immediately. We need to talk about these ridiculous papers." Ridiculous papers. He was already trying to minimize it, to frame me as the one being unreasonable. I took a deep breath and typed out a reply, my fingers steady. "All communication should go through my lawyer, Mr. Davison. His number is on the documents you received." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The silence that followed was more telling than any angry outburst. He knew I was serious. He knew I had a lawyer. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer just his disappointed son. I was the plaintiff. A few hours later, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. It was Isabel. Her voice, usually so smooth and controlled, was tight with fury. "Henry, what do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "You are tearing this family apart over a house. Mark is devastated. Do you have any idea what you're putting him through?" What I'm doing, Isabel, I said, my voice cold and calm, is enforcing a court order that my father has been ignoring for 3 years. A court order that he violated when he put your name on the deed to my house. Your house, she scoffed. This is our home. We've invested so much into it. My designs, my work. Your investments are irrelevant to the legal decree, I cut in, parroting the words Mr. Davison had used. This is between my father and the court. You and he will need to get your own lawyer. I hung up the phone. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. I had stood up to her not with emotion but with facts and law. The legal arrow had been fired. It was soaring through the air, aimed directly at the cornerstone of their lie. Now all I could do was wait for it to strike. The court date was set for 6 weeks away. It would be the longest 6 weeks of my life. The morning of the court date was gray and overcast, the sky a perfect reflection of my mood. I put on the one suit I owned, feeling like I was dressing for a funeral rather than a legal hearing. My mom met me at the courthouse, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. You're doing the right thing, Henry, she said, her voice steady. Justice isn't always easy, but it's necessary. Mr. Davison was waiting for us inside, his briefcase full and his expression confident. We walked into the courtroom, a formal wood-paneled room that felt cold and intimidating. My father and Isabel were already there, sitting on the opposite side with their lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. My father wouldn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. Isabel, however, fixed me wit. A glare of pure venom. If looks could kill, I would have been a pile of ash on the courtroom floor. The hearing began and it felt surreal. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Miller, called the case and Mr. Davison stood up to present our motion. He spoke clearly and methodically, laying out the facts without emotion. He presented the certified divorce decree, highlighting Section 7B. He presented the property records showing my father's failure to transfer the title on my 25th birthday. And then he presented the quitclaim deed, dated just 2 months prior, which added Isabel's name as a co-owner. Your Honor, Mr. Davison concluded, this is a textbook case of a party willfully ignoring a court order. For 3 years, Mr. Johnson failed to comply with the decree. Then he took an action in direct violation of that same decree. We are asking the court to enforce the original order, compel the defendant to transfer the property to my client, Henry Johnson, and to hold the defendant in contempt for his willful disobedience. When it was their lawyer's turn, he stood up and tried to paint a very different picture. He portrayed my father as a loving, if forgetful, parent. Your Honor, my client, Mr. Johnson, has always intended for his son to inherit the house, he argued, his voice smooth and persuasive. The failure to transfer the title at age 25 was a simple oversight, a matter of paperwork that fell by the wayside in the course of busy lives. Judge Miller looked at my father over the top of her glasses. An oversight for 3 years, the lawyer pressed on. As for adding his wife, Mrs. Johnson, to the deed, it was an act of love and commitment, a standard step for a married couple securing their assets. There was no malice intended. My client simply didn't recall the specific decade-old wording of the decree. This was their strategy, to play it off as a harmless mistake, a misunderstanding. Mr. Davison, on rebuttal, was having none of it. Your Honor, ignorance of a court order is not a defense, he stated flatly, especially when the defendant is a construction manager who deals with deeds, permits, and legal documents as a matter of course, and forgetting a clause that dictates the transfer of his single largest asset strains credulity. The judge then turned her attention directly to my father. Mr. Johnson, stand up, she commanded. My father rose slowly, his face pale. Did you or did you not sign this divorce decree in 2009, she asked. Yes, Your Honor, he mumbled. And did you understand its terms at the time, he hesitated. I believe so. Then can you explain to me why for 3 years you failed to transfer this property to your son as you were ordered to do by this court? My father stammered, trying to repeat the oversight excuse. The judge cut him off. And can you explain why you then added another owner to the title, an action explicitly prohibited by the decree you signed? He had no answer. He just stood there, speechless, the confident facade he always wore completely stripped away. The judge looked from my father to me, then back again. She sighed, a sound of profound judicial impatience. The ruling of this court is as follows, she announced, her voice echoing in the silent room. The motion to enforce is granted. Mr. Johnson, you are hereby ordered to remove Isabel Johnson from the deed and execute a transfer of title of the property at 142 Maple Drive to your son, Henry Johnson, within 30 days. A wave of relief washed over me so powerful it almost made my knees buckle. My mom squeezed my hand again, this time with triumphant pressure, but the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, her gaze fixed on my father, I find you in contempt of court. Your failure to comply was not an oversight, it was a willful disregard for a legal order. You will pay a fine of $5,000 to the court, and you will also be responsible for all of your son's legal fees associated with this motion. Isabel let out a small gasp. My father looked like he had been punched. He had lost. He hadn't just lost the argument, he had been publicly rebuked, fined, and ordered to undo the very act that had caused all this pain. The decree had won against the deed. Justice, black and white and bound by law, had prevailed. The day of reckoning had come, and it was more complete than I ever could have imagined. The 30 days following the court hearing were tense and quiet. There were no angry phone calls, no dramatic confrontations. My father and Isabel had retreated into a shell of bitter silence. All communication happened through the lawyers. Documents were signed, filings were made, and exactly 28 days after the ruling, a package arrived for me via courier. Inside was a set of keys and a single notarized document, the deed to 142 Maple Drive, now solely in the name of Henry Johnson. Holding that paper in my hands, I didn't feel the explosive joy I had expected. Instead, I felt a quiet, profound sense of finality. The battle was over. The house was mine, but the cost had been high. My relationship with my father was in ruins, perhaps irreparably. The victory felt necessary, but it was also deeply sad. I had won back my future, but I had lost a part of my past. The first time I went to the house as its sole owner was strange. I used the old key I'd had since I was a teenager, and it still worked. I walked through the rooms that Isabel had so meticulously redesigned. Her furniture was still there, but it felt temporary, like stage props left behind after a play had ended. According to the lawyers, they had 60 days to vacate the premises. The house was in a state of limbo, belonging to me but still occupied by them. I walked through the sterile white kitchen, running my hand over the cold marble countertop. I went upstairs to my old bedroom, which had been converted into a guest room that looked like it belonged in a hotel catalog. Nothing felt like mine. It was a house, but it wasn't a home. I realized then that reclaiming the property was only the first step. The next, and perhaps harder, step was reclaiming its soul. My father and Isabel moved out 5 weeks later, well before the deadline. They found a modern condo downtown, a place with no history, no memories to paint over. My father left a short typed letter on the kitchen island. It wasn't an apology. It was a justification, a final attempt to frame his actions as misunderstood good intentions. He wrote that he hoped one day I would understand that he was only trying to build a new life and that he never meant to hurt me. He wrote that he would always love me. The words felt hollow, a weak attempt to rebuild a bridge he himself had dynamited. I folded the letter and put it away. Maybe one day I would be able to forgive him, but that day was a long way off. For now, there was work to be done. My mom, Alina, helped me with the process of making the house mine again. We started by boxing up the last of Isabel's decorative touches, the soulless gray vases and the abstract art that said nothing. Then we started to undo her changes. The first project was the kitchen door. We stripped the layers of bland white paint until the faint, ghostly outlines of my childhood height marks reappeared. Seeing them felt like finding a lost treasure. I took a pencil and added a new mark for myself at 28, a full head taller than the last one. It was a small act, but it was a declaration. I was here. My history was here. Over the next few months, I worked on the house not as a drafter with a set of blueprints, but as a son reclaiming his home. I didn't have the money for a full renovation, but I did what I could. I repainted the living room in a warm, familiar blue. I brought back some of the old furniture my mom had kept in storage, including the worn-out armchair my dad used to read to me in. Sitting in it again felt like a hug from the past. The house began to breathe again. It started to feel less like a showroom and more like a home. One afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, I found the small shovel we had used to plant the oak tree in the backyard all those years ago. I went outside and stood under its massive branches. The tree had grown so much, its roots running deep into the soil. My father had been wrong. He hadn't needed to protect his new life by destroying the old one. The tree was proof that new growth doesn't require you to tear out the roots. I finally understood that the house wasn't just a building or an asset. It was a promise not just from my father, but from my mother as well. It was the last remnant of the family we once were, entrusted to me to carry forward. The legal battle had been about more than just property. It was about honoring that trust. Standing there with the keys to the front door in my pocket and the deed safe in a drawer inside, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The cornerstone of a lie had been replaced by a foundation of truth, legally binding and solid as stone. The house was mine, and in it, I held the keys to my future.